introduce the panel. Joining us today we have, in an odd order, I've got it round the wrong way, but never mind, Andrew Jefford, who is probably known to most of you. He's son of a vicar, actually, which possibly you don't know. There's a little bit of colour for you. He is a UK person, as I am, and as indeed Richard is at the end. Andrew became a wine writer in 1988, so he's been doing this for quite some time. He does it quite successfully, I think, because he supports a wife and 2 children, so he'll be able to tell us how he manages to do that through his wine writing. He writes for a lot of UK national newspapers and magazines, including Decanter and World of Fine Wine. So he's a great speaker for us to have today. He was also voted Blogger of the Year, I think, is that right? So, respect. He's written 12 books and guides, and he's got one about Australian wine and terroir in the pipeline. He tweets in a rather distinctive manner. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter, but he tweets haiku. I could have asked him to do a haiku presentation for us today. That would have been quite
been over very quickly.
Well, that could be a good thing. Anyway, that's Andrew. Next to Andrew, at the end there is Richard Siddle. Richard is the editor of a UK wine and spirits trade magazine called Harpers. He's been there since 2007. But he's got 20 plus years under his belt as a trade journalist, writing, I believe, on the grocery retail side of things. He's a bit of a campaigner. He was also against violent crime against retailers, which is another interesting story that he'll tell you perhaps at another time. He gives money to people in that he is an editor of a magazine, thus he commissions articles. He pays people to write for the magazine. I don't know, honestly, how often he commissions freelancers. I imagine he tries to keep to his budget and work in-house as well, but he'll tell us more about that. He also gives money to the EWBC, which is brilliant, not out of his own pocket, but from Harpers. Harpers is a media sponsor of the EWBC, so for that we thank Richard and Harpers. Next to Andrew, wearing glasses, is Audrey. Audrey is French, but she speaks very good English, which is good for us. She spent some time in the UK, didn't you, working for a fine wine importer. She has worked in the wine industry for 10 years in a variety of different roles. One of them was with a Marseille-based company called Ricard, where she worked in events, but she also worked in sales, didn't you? Flogging pasties?
Yeah, from bar to bar.
Yeah, which smells a lot like raki. So if you just breathe in deeply, I guess this is taking you back, isn't it, the smell? There you go. She also worked for the Appellation Châteauneuf-du-Pape in Avignon, and in the UK with Richard Siddle, as I said. But more recently, she became a freelance social media manager. And what I think is particularly interesting is that Audrey has managed to translate her skills into a pro context. She turned pro, as it were, I would say a year ago, pretty much, coming up for a year, when she started working for a French trade magazine called Viti. And she also works for their newly launched website, mon-viti.com, mon-viti.com, which is a leading French B2B wine magazine. And then finally, at the end, we have Lisa Shara Hall, who is bringing the American perspective here today, which is great, because everybody else is rather Euro, but so it's great to have somebody from a little further afield. Lisa is the author of a couple of books about food and wine, and she's working on a new book, I believe, about Oregon wines. She is also the senior editor for Wine Business Monthly, Wine Business Insider, and winebusiness.com. She writes for the Oxford Companion to Wine, the Hugh Johnson Jancis Robinson World Atlas of Wine by Decanter. She's a lecturer, an educator, a wine judge. But the reason I'm interested to have her on the panel today is that she also earns a proportion of her living writing about wine, so she's in a good position to tell us how to get stories into print and give us some of her tips. So we're going to start with Richard. Each person's got sort of 7 or 8 minutes and a short slide-based presentation.
Thank you for having me here. I do feel a bit of an interloper coming to a blogging conference being part of mainstream media. I've always sometimes get a sense that I know bloggers and mainstream media, there's a sort of a divide between the two, but we increasingly use bloggers on Harpers, particularly online with our website, so there is great opportunity, I think, for bloggers to get into mainstream media, so it's a good opportunity to talk today. I thought I'd just ask first question really today. I thought the question is, how many people here have got a wine qualification or have studied wine to any capacity? And who here has done any kind of professional writing course, like kind of how to write? And it's quite interesting. I think if you ask people in the whole conference here how many bloggers will have taken the trouble to actually learn how to write, learn about wine, so they can write about wine, and yet how many people actually bothered to actually really learn how to write. Sorry. Yeah. And I think that's for me, a real takeaway from this conference is there's a lot of assumption that everybody who's a blogger is somehow a good writer, and there's an assumption that journalists are good writers. And the thing is, lots of journalists aren't good writers, and that's why they don't get very good jobs. And to get yourself on in a career, you really do have to look about how you're actually physically good at writing. So anyway, that's my initial point. And the reason why I say that is you could say, well, you learn how to write when you're at school. Well, if you took my example, my history teacher at school, I think, would be amazed if you knew that I was editing a magazine or ended up being a journalist. Because I must say, when I was at school, and even when I went to university, my writing essays, writing any kind of major articles, I was rubbish, really, really bad. I remember I got a U once in some English essay, and basically my big problem was I just couldn't work out how to structure a story, work out what was important. And my history teacher said to me, he goes, it's a bit like your writing is like throwing a custard pie at a dartboard. And he said, if a dartboard, for example, was the Industrial Revolution, and every single number was a different fact about the Industrial Revolution, your question I had to answer was, what are the causes of the Industrial Revolution? And he said that would be chapter 20. Your answer was throwing a custard pie at the whole thing. You told me everything you know about the Industrial Revolution and not one thing about causes. And I think that actually, to be honest, is a real problem. I think we heard this morning from another speaker about the key for journalism or key for good writing is not what you put in, it's what you put out. And I think that if you can really sort of examine how your own skills are. As a journalist, we're tested every day about how good you are, be it by your editor, by your sub-editor, your publisher, your reader. Every day, people are questioning how good your work is. And if you're very good, you either get sacked or you don't get promoted. Whereas, as I say, with bloggers, how often do you actually get people to assess your work, get people to actually tell you, is it good, is it bad? And unless you really know, how can you sort of move on and be a good writer? So one thing I learned when I was at university, I did a journalism course. One of the things they teach you is take your last article you wrote and then cut it in half. And take all the work you've done, take the length, and then just cut it in half and try and keep all the main points of that article in that piece. And then when you've done that, do it again and cut it down again to less than 100 words. And it's incredibly difficult to do. But if you keep on practicing, it's actually quite easy, because they teach you it's all about, and every journalist knows this, who, what, how, why, when. And every news story, every article you read will essentially have who, what, how, why, when. And that's all you need to worry about. And it's actually very, very hard to do. And if you think about this conference, think about writing a story about yesterday's events. What would you write about? Which bit of content would you have taken? And that's a kind of skill you need to work on. In journalism, the most respected journalists aren't people who work on Financial Times, The Guardian, New York Times. The ones that journalists really respect are the sub-editors who work on the tabloids, the Daily Mirror, the Sun, Bild. And the reason why is because they have an ability to turn that who, what, how, why, when into less than 10 words. They can do, if you look at, say, things like the Greek debt crisis, the FT would have, say, an introduction of about 200 words and explain everything about it. You pick up the Daily Mail or Bill, and they'll have the whole story in 10 words. And that is, as I say here, the Masters of Wine were journalists. They would be the senators on the tabloids. It's just so difficult to do.
Can I just get you to hold it horizontal in front of your mouth?
It's like not being a dentist. So really, it's all about planning and structuring what you do. And I don't know, I myself struggle, even now, 20 years on, at doing that. And it's something which I think you all need to take away. The thing about being a blogger, as opposed to being a journalist, is that the most important thing when you're a blogger is potentially yourself, because obviously you're writing about yourself. When you come to getting published work, the least important person is yourself. So you almost have to sort of completely change the way you write. And it's not about what you think, unless you've been asked to write an opinion piece. It's actually what the audience or the publication might want. And I liken it a little bit to, I don't even remember the cartoon, Lottie the dog, and in the cartoon he was always wanting a little medal. And it was all about me. And so much wine writing, wine blogging, is I went to the winery, I tasted X wines, here's my tasting notes. And who cares, really? I mean, unless you're Jazz Robinson or Andrew Jefford, there are very few people in the wine world where their opinion on a wine is really that interesting. So you've got to really think about why somebody would want to write, use your work. So blogging is all about you. Journalism is all about the reader. The most important person when you look at, say, a publication is who the readers are. I mean, Tony Lathwaite yesterday talked about Dr. John as his reader. And that's the key thing, is you have to remember who it is that you're writing to, who is the publication's reader. So my job is not writing about myself, or who I think in this room, it's actually thinking about the whole industry, who would be interested in what I'm writing about. You have to be relevant. So if you're doing an interview with a winemaker, what is the relevance of what they're saying to the reader? So to get commissioned, understand the magazine you're pitching to, get hold of the media pack, what your readers' interests are, and it will change with every article you write. Harpers magazine is very different from Decanter, very different from World of Fine Wine, so you've got to change the way you write depending on who you're commissioning. Also remember, we as editors and journalists are actually very busy people, and we can't go to everything. And you can, and that's why we are using more and more bloggers, because you can go to tastings, you can go to events that we can't cover. So think about the things that you're doing that week, and then pitch to us items about where you're going to. Lots of bloggers do that to us, and that's who we are using a lot more. So, some golden rules of journalism. Hit your deadline, hit your word count. It sounds obvious, but the amount of times you can say to a writer, have 1,000 words on a topic, and they'll send you the article in 1,600 words. I just got carried away with myself. I hope you really like it. Please publish it all. And you've only got 2 pages. You can't suddenly create another half page for your extra words. So always send your copy in online. If you don't, you just create more work for us. And the more work you create for us, the more you won't get used again. Think about the style. If magazine style is November 8 rather than 8 November, or percentage sign rather than the actual thing itself, make sure you put those in, because every time you don't do, we have to do it ourselves. Okay? So basically, for me, it's all about being seeing writing as a profession, as being professional as you can. I mean, and I've done a bit of Turkey to find some new talent, so please call to catch up, please.
Okay, right, now obviously for this dangerous opening scene I had to acquire a body double, which is why that person doesn't look terribly much like me. Louise suggested I spoke really about two topics, so I'm going to do that one after the other. The first is earning a living, and the second is how you actually get commissions. Earning a living, first of all. Well, it's a very pat phrase, which I think comes to mean an awful lot of different things depending on your circumstances, and of course circumstances always differ. When I think about the blogging community, obviously most bloggers, most younger writers will begin as single people without children. And of course, under those circumstances, you can get by on modest remuneration. But if you end up, as most of you either are or will, as a family of 3, 4, or 5, that's going to change. Now, assuming you've got no family loot, either you or your partner is going to have to earn quite a lot of money at some stage. And in most wine writing cases, if I look round to my long distance peers, my wine writing peers, that generally means your partner. And that's actually quite a serious matter, which I think everybody here really needs to think about. It's not possible, it is not possible to make a living purely from freelance wine writing, no matter how successful you are, unless you get, to the very, very top, which is not going to happen to all of us by any means. The problem is that the necessary skills and research takes too long, and the remuneration rates are too poor. You take 4 or 5 days to do a trip somewhere, for example, then you get back, then you have another 2 days to write it up, and maybe 1 day to check stuff, and then you get paid €500 at the end of it, or £500, which is sort of £70 a day or €70 a day, and obviously you can't feed and clothe a family on that. So if you don't have a partner who earns pretty well in his or her own right, then I think what you need to do is turn yourself into some kind of specialist media business. Fairly horrible phrase, but this is the kind of thing it means. You have to get involved in education, you have to get involved in marketing, PR, educational services, consultancy, whatever it is that your talents would naturally lead you to and your contacts can help you to acquire. Now, obviously, if you look at that list and then you think about, the highest standards of journalistic objectivity and so on, the first thing that will come to mind is, does that not create conflicts of interest? Well, the truth is it does create conflicts of interest. And the only way you can really resolve that is by, the French had this wonderful word, déontologie, which you can't ever translate directly into English, but it means something like professional code of ethics. And I think it behoves all of us really should work quite hard at acquiring that professional code of ethics, as you do all of these other activities. And as I say, I think if you want to make a long-term career out of it, you will have to get involved in all of these other activities. I get very exercised when you hear people like Robert Parker and so on lecturing other wine writers about conflicts of interest. Because there are only 2 or 3 wine writers in the world who could actually afford to do what they do without ever acquiring any potential conflict of interest. Because wine writing means travelling around the world, it means staying in hotels, it means a lot of administration as you set up interviews and meetings and so on, it means running an office, it means all of that. And that requires huge resources which most of us don't have. And I have to say as well that if you want to be comfortably off, based principally on your own income rather than your partner's, then these kind of other activities, the education, the marketing, the educational services, the consultancy, will probably need to take the primary role. Because wine writing will always be poorly paid. Lots of people want to do it. Supply always exceeds demand. And at the same time, frankly, it's a nerdy area of journalism. It's not mainstream journalism at all. And that means that top quality work in that field will never be particularly highly remunerated, because there's always an oversupply. There are always lots of good people out there offering lots of good work. As I said in my opening speech to the conference, you know, much of the best wine writing I've seen over the last few years has been entirely unremunerated. It's been put up by people putting it up on the web, blogging, enthusiasts, whatever you want to call yourself. But there's absolutely high quality work going up there, and nobody's being paid for it. Also in the wine world, because it's not a mainstream area at all, it's, as I say, nerdy. That's one way of putting it. You could call it specialised if you want. That also means that there are very few top jobs. There are, in the UK, for example, market that I know best, newspaper jobs have more or less dried up completely. There's only 2 or 3 newspapers that now take that subject seriously. All the others have given up with it, regarding it as being unbelievably specialised and nerdy, and they don't want to persist with it. So those top jobs aren't going to come up very often. Those who had them aren't going to want to give them away. In the newspapers as well, you'll get as little space as the editors can possibly feel they can give you, because generally mainstream editors aren't terribly interested in the subject. They'll then pay as little as possible for it, and they're often, frankly, content with second-rate contributions from people that they, for whatever reason, they feel comfortable, rather than actually researching top-quality performers in the area. Furthermore, just to make you all really gloomy, it's also an area where celebrities occasionally like to toss their hats and camp for a while, and they produce unbelievably second-rate copy in most cases, and they get paid 3 times more than you'll ever get hoped to pay for it, to get paid for your work, your much higher quality work. But there you are. That's it. That's life. C'est la vie. That's the way it happens. Now, yep, okay, we'll move swiftly on to how you get commissions. Actually, Richard gave you lots of jolly good tips. So I hope you took notes at that point, because they were excellent tips. What I'm going to say, summarising all of that, is that you have to write very good copy, and also you have to make friends with those doing the commissioning. There's no 2 ways about that. This is a people business. If you just sit at home and send in articles and send in proposals and send in pitches and never go and meet anybody, you're not going to get much work. You do have to go out and meet people, and that's quite an important part of it. If you do both, if they come to like you and trust you, you will get lots of work. And to keep getting lots of work, you have to keep writing very good copy, exactly the word length, as Richard said in the brief, and delivered either early or on time. If you make the editor's life as easy as possible, and if you develop a good relationship with that editor, then he or she will give you more work. How difficult are the different bits? Well, I think writing good copy is more difficult than making friends with editors for most people. You do need some talent in that respect, though I'm sure all of you have that already. And then you need to do lots of polishing and refining. It's a very laborious process. There's no shortcuts. I can't really give you any tips other than learn to be your own most stringent critic. And also, I think, learn to keep reading in other fields. Don't just read wine writing. Read in whatever other subject inspires you, whether it's Chinese poetry or sports journalism or German philosophy or whatever it is. But just keep your inspiration stream coming from outside, because that will keep your writing quite fresh. But the most important bit is the self-criticism bit. I know I'm very close to the end of my time, so this is almost the last thing I'll say. But in my past, I spent 6 years in university studying English literature, including 1 year sitting in on the creative writing course at the University of East Anglia. And I also spent 4 years working as an editor for a mass market publisher who was publishing books of no literary interest whatsoever. They were just illustrated books on, cooking and dreams and cars and golf and that sort of stuff. And we had lots of authors submitting, asked to write books who could not write. And so I spent 4 years taking catastrophically bad sentences to pieces and trying to work out how you could put the words back together and make a rather decent sentence out of all of that. And that nitty-gritty work, that destroying sentences, putting them back together, looking for the way the sentence actually works, just the nuts and bolts of writing. 4 years spent doing that was much, much more useful to me as a journalist than 6 years studying literature at university, reading great authors, and indulging myself with a creative writing course. So that's my... Louise asked for a couple of tips right at the end, so here you are. How you write matters more than what you write about. I said that in the opening speech. It's true again today, true every day, be true tomorrow too. Play by the rules, read the brief, write to length, submit on time, and then read outside the subject as well as inside.
Okay, I'm actually a newbie journalist. I just thought it would be interesting for you to know my experience about it. I actually was not a journalist. I'm a white trade person, and I initiated my company, and I wanted to be a social media manager, which I found my first customer, and I thought to develop myself, I wanted to get like a promotion. So I contacted several B2B magazines in order to offer my help as an expert about that. And BT Magazine offered me a partnership, and the partnership was that I was writing for free, but a little amount of the 2 pages I was writing was actually promotional for myself, for my company. And then as I was writing, they offered me more writing, and our relationship developed, and finally I contacted them and I said, well, look, you know, I'm talking about social media and wine in your magazine, but do you yourself, are you on social media, or do you need any help about it? And they say, well, look, we actually need your help, and we would like to employ you. So that's how it all started. Sorry.
You're doing great.
So I think when you write, you really need to know who you are writing for. So you need to get interest in their interest and put yourself in their shoes. So you also need to know the media you are writing for. So for example, for VT Magazine, I bought it, I read it regularly, I have actually analyzed all the magazine, and I've figured out that, you know, all the articles were coming several times in the same kind of information field. So I was really, how to say that, it's like doing a redaction guide. It's just like every time the magazine goes out, there's articles that are going to talk about international market or packaging or, I don't know, enology or tractors. There's always something coming back. So it's really good to know the magazine, how it works, because then you can see how you can fit in and always propose, you know, good subjects to talk about. Yeah, that's what I was saying. So it's a good way to propose expertise and content, because actually in the wine and trade B2B magazine, they are really they need people that are, you know, on the ground. Yeah. So they get like a true reflection of the market and how it happens. And also, well, that's perhaps because I'm a social media manager, but social media is also a very good tool to manage your networks and develop relationships. So you, of course, need to meet people, but keeping in contact via social media is really useful. And it's very useful when you're a journalist to have this network to keep in touch with, you know, the news and all the, I don't know, things that are just coming out or surprising or interesting or different. So it's really important to create a wide network of accessible contacts who are helpful and responsive. Also, when you write for a magazine, I think it's really important to find the appropriate contact and call that person very often. Keep close contact and know their needs really. And the most important thing about it is when they speak, you just shut up and you listen carefully. That's a... and then just, you know, always have several ideas and just, you know, once you listen to something, you just like you pop up with some other idea, other angles, other things, and the discussion starts, and then you can really have a proper professional relationship. Interesting. Also, that's what he said. I think it's really interesting when you go to an event, you wear different hats. Just like today, I'm Audrey Domenach, all right? I'm working for VT. I'm working for monde-vt.com, but I'm also a wine blogger. I write for my blog, and also I'm going to write for other French sites, just like Le Figaro, about the European Wine Bloggers Conference. And I think it's really interesting because you can talk about the same event, the same thing, but from different angles and for different people, which then make the trips really, really worth it, because you can earn different money from just one trip. Then, of course, if you're an expert in your field, it makes things easier because you are interesting, and you are interested because you also have the good network. And also, respect the deadline, even be early when you have to hand out an article. That's very, very important, because all the organization in a printing magazine is really complex, and then you put people in a disaster if you're late or too long. Yeah, so remember, thanks to the internet, you can be a publisher too. When people are going to employ you, they employ you because of the quality of your article, because of the quality of your ideas, but they employ you as well because you have a name and they know you have an audience already. That's about the branded person Andrew was talking about. And that really helps. Thank you.
Okay. In the United States, consumer and trade publications are a little different from the way they are in Britain, not so much in France, but certainly in Britain. Trade publications, and my trade publication, really focuses on new equipment, exporting, style changes, new appellations, very technical information. We don't at all write for the consumer. We write for wine growers, for vineyard, for wineries. That is our primary market, and you have to understand that to be able to write for us. Personal relationships go far in the wine industry. Get to know the people in charge of the publication. Once they know who you are and can evaluate your blog or your writing, then it's much easier to get a commission from them. We use mostly in-house people. We don't use a lot of external writers. Occasionally we do. So it's very important to know who you're dealing with. Yes. And again, with the trade publication in the US, I can't stress this enough, be aware that the difference between consumer publications and trade publications is vastly different. One's much more technical, one is much more broad. But I do have one good idea for bloggers and how they can earn money. If bloggers go to wineries and ask them to pay them to blog just about their wineries or a group of wineries, that's one way. Or to do social media, to do Facebook and Twitter for a winery. You can get paid to do that. So now we're up to questions.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We've probably got a little bit of time left for observations, very small. Robert's showing a very small thing. Anybody want to make a comment, an observation, a question? Yeah, there you go. I don't know if you really need this, but I'll give it to you anyway. It's a very small room, but there you go.
Kind of a question, kind of an observation, really. It's interesting to me, for some of us it seems like there's a sense that we feel validated by appearing in print media as opposed to online media. And I just wondered if anyone on the panel thinks that's still true, and is it kind of strange, that we only feel truly validated as writers or journalists when we are in this media which is seen as old-fashioned, etc.
Who'd like to talk about that one?
I put the way I look at it as a journalist, it's sort of the validation, I suppose, only comes from the hierarchy of the publication you're in. For example, you can write a very good article, but it appears in a magazine or a newspaper that no one actually really reads or respects, then that validation is not there. If you wrote a great article in the UK and it appeared in the Daily Star, you're not going to get the same kind of credibility as it appears in the FT. So I think it's the same.
Andrew, did you want to?
Yeah, I think this is changing really, really quickly, and I just sort of feel it in my own work because it's probably some of you know I write for Decanter, and I do a print column for them every month, and I do now a blog column for them every week on the website. And when I started doing that, the sort of, obviously I thought, the print column's the most important, and that's the one I put all the effort into, and the blog column we can just tickle a subject along here and there, and that can be nice. And now, mentally, that's completely changed. And the most significant thing about that is that on the internet, you have a much more international reach, and suddenly I'm aware that people are reading it in all sorts of countries where they probably weren't reading my print column. And also you're reaching actually a much broader spectrum of readers now, because the adoption of the habits of reading online are so rapid and dramatic, particularly amongst the younger generation. So now, with the proviso that if we're talking about paid work, so if you can do paid work on the internet, blogging if you like, or paid work in print, personally I would now always rather do it on the internet, because I think the audience is just much, much, much bigger.
Do you think that has to do, though, with the fact that it's validated by a third party like Decanter versus for yourself?
Well, obviously that's what everybody kind of should be aiming for, to have somebody to pay you to put work onto their validation, as it were. That's the ideal. But that can be in lots and lots of different ways. It doesn't just have to be newspapers or magazines. There are other people that can adopt your work and pay you for it. I don't think that matters too much how you do it, but yes, I think that is a factor.
Yeah, Justin.
I just wanted to really make an observation that if anyone wants to be paid to do something, you have to work out who's got the money. And a lot of publications don't have much money anymore. They're not making money. The people who have money are probably producers, retailers, generic bodies. So write for them, and you might make some money.
That was sort of.
Does Lakeways have any money?
We employ writers. We employ writers.
Terrific. Excellent. Anybody else, Brian?
Again, just an observation. Andrew talked about the fact that it's virtually impossible to make a good standard of living from wine writing, and that a number of other options that you could consider, one of which was PR. Obviously that's a field that I'm very closely involved with, and it was just to add that the comments that Richard made about pitching a story, about getting your copy good, writing effectively, getting it, hitting deadlines, etc., etc., etc. I think they apply just as much to PR, possibly you could even argue more to PR than they do to being a freelancer and trying to pitch a story. So don't go down the PR route unless you're prepared to actually meet those obligations, because you won't be very good PR.
Thank you for that perspective from one.
That's very true. I mean, journalists do rely a lot on PR. I mean, if you could be really cynical, virtually every story that appears in a newspaper or a magazine at its very root will have some PR. A government minister will deliver a speech, but it'll be spun by the spin doctor. There's always, but equally, the journalist completely relies on the PR getting the facts right. So if they send you a press release and the person's name is spelled a certain way, you kind of assume that they've got that right. And a lot of mistakes that actually appear in papers can come from, you say, shoddy PR. So I do completely agree.
Not that Bryony would have anything to do with
No,
shape.
of course.
Good. We're coming up for lunchtime. I'm sure you're hungry. We've got one more question perhaps, and then if anybody else wants to talk, maybe we can do that over lunch downstairs, yeah?
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
We're consolidating two questions, one person. And the first is about the pitch length. I think, Andrew, you said that you think the future of wine writing has some humor in it. And I'm always a little bit frustrated, or maybe I should ask this after, but unless anybody else cares about the question. But
I'm interested.
okay, my writing does tend to be a little bit on the not quite as serious side, and I feel like a pitch should reflect that. But on the other hand, I'm afraid that in the ivory towers of print journalism or paid journalism, if I have a lighter tone, I'm not going to be taken seriously. So I'm wondering how you feel about that. If I write a pitch that's more casual and more friendly, am I going to be tossed aside because I'm not taking it seriously? Or is that sort of refreshing, oh good, I don't have to read a long pitch and this is fun. Anyway, my second question was, do you think that there's always the need to write tasting notes? I really like writing about the wineries themselves, but to go into like, this tastes like currant and blah blah blah, I don't know.
I'm going to suggest that we do the tasting notes one over lunch, but let's take, maybe Richard, do you want to answer the first question about whether a pitch should be made humorously or...
Yeah, I mean, it is very important, actually, pitches, and I would say, actually, the most important thing in a pitch is actually what you put in the subject bar of your email. And I learned this from, I was once doing these interviews on the BBC where they send you around different radio stations and you sort of sit in a booth and they ask you questions from different stations. And this BBC producer was sitting next to me on his computer. He was literally just going through all these emails coming in of press releases, so he was literally just deleting like 90% of them. And I said, that's a bit harsh, that there could have been a good story. And he just said, no, he said, we have a rule. If you just said press release in the colon, or he didn't actually explain what it's about, they just delete it. They haven't got the time to bother opening it up. And the amount of times you get an email and it'll just literally be, I don't know, it could just say, Bloggers Conference, Izmir, Turkey. Well, what does that mean? So the chances are you just delete it, you won't bother reading it. So actually, if you want to, you could actually do something quite funny in the headline, in that subject bar, you could be quite, grab your attention. That definitely, but obviously when you actually write your pitch, yeah, you can certainly be short and to the point and be funny, but obviously you've got to, it depends on who you're pitching to, and so yeah, you just, that's my key thing though, is how you actually sell yourself, literally those 3 or 4 words.
I think Lisa wants to say something as well.
On the tasting note part, as a trade publication, we don't publish any tasting notes at all. That's not interesting to the winemakers or the vine growers, so we just don't do that at all.
Andrew, can this be the last sort of thing and then we'll wrap up?
Yep. Just on that whole humour thing, what I was thinking of chiefly there was the blogger blogging and trying to come up with some kind of point of difference in the enormously oversupplied blogosphere. And I do think there is a place out there for somebody to do things in a sort of a funny way, or a gonzo way, or a totally irreverent way, or a piss-taking way, if I can almost put it in those vulgar terms. Because I do think the wine world needs an awful lot of that, because most of the commission work is rather serious. And obviously if you're pitching to a trade magazine, well, they're not going to take many humorous columns, it's just the wrong place to pitch, and you wouldn't do that because you've read the trade magazine already and you know how they talk to their readers. In general, I think when you're speaking to the broader public, there is more of a place for humour. But it's almost one of those things that you have to develop your reputation first. You have to prove you can do it. You have to have a few links that you could send to your work where you've done that successfully. And then they can see, oh yeah, this person can do that. There's one guy in the UK called Chris Losh who can do it very well. Occasionally people come up like that. It's actually quite a rare quality. And I say, you know, for me, as a reader, I would love to read much more of that. I think most wine writing, most wine blogging is a bit too serious. And there is a place for levity.
And also remember, to write funny is incredibly hard. You know, tell a joke that's funny is very, very hard. And again, it just comes back to, are you actually funny at writing? And if you are, then great, but don't try and do it just because you think it's cool to do it.